Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to the show. Super excited to be chatting with you here. And today's episode is a continuation from last week's episode. We had the lovely Erika Simone on, and she dropped a lot of gems. And so this is just a continuation of that episode. And of course, before I get into things with Erika, definitely like to clean up some of the administrative stuff, or discuss some of the administrative stuff rather. And we have the email list at drnataliejones.com. So if you want to be in the know, typically the newsletter comes out every Friday morning, first thing. You can have that with your coffee or your tea, and kind of read through that as I talk about elements of abuse through that newsletter. And if you want to be in the know with the group and individual membership coaching, which we are diligently working on that behind the scenes. So there's going to be a lot of perks. Please click the link in the show notes down below, and you'll be the first on the list for that. And of course, we have the support group, A Date with Darkness support group via Facebook. And if you like what you hear, please be sure to share, like, subscribe, and leave a positive review so that others can find the podcast. All right. And so I definitely want to get into things here with Erika. I just love talking to her. She's one of those people, again, I'll mention, that just gets it. And, it's always such a fun time talking with her. And this episode is no different. And she drops a lot of just gems about masculine and feminine energy. Her and I really get into that discussion, as well as a discussion on limerence. So without further ado, here's Erika Simone. Hello and welcome to the show, Erika. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for having me back. Part two.
Part two. Okay, so for folks that may not have tuned in last week or may not be familiar with your work, can you give us a quick intro to who you are, what you do, and the passion behind your work?
Yeah. So my name is Erika Simone. I call myself like a love and life coach. I really help women in the area of dating and relationships, so more so the inner work and emotional healing behind that. So I focus a lot on healing, attachment, and then also feminine versus masculine polarity, things like that. Just a lot of like the behind the scenes of really attracting the relationship that you want, and really focusing on doing the inner work on us versus like looking at external things, if that makes sense. So yeah.
I love it. In
Mhm.
feminine versus masculine polarity, can you tell us a little bit about what that is? Because there's a lot of talk about that now, especially in the dating world. Feminine energy, masculine
Mhm.
energy, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. Can you break it down for folks who may not be familiar with that?
Yeah. So everyone may have different beliefs around it, but I'm just going to kind of share mine from what I've seen, the research, my interactions with men. So men and women, we know that we are different. We can look at science, our brains. Things are very different. The way that we experience love, our phases of attraction, what makes us feel honored, what makes us feel loved, it's really different. And so a lot of times there's some traits that usually go along with women that we would call in the feminine energy, such as being creative, more emotionally in tune, being very intuitive, the flow, being able to receive, surrendered, all that kind of stuff. Then you have traits that usually kind of go along with more of that masculine energy. So that's a lot more in the head space. So very logic driven, very goal action oriented, very do. And whereas the feminine is kind of more of that being type of energy. And where the masculine is kind of more of that leaning forward, the feminine is more of that leaning back. This is why you'll see like a lot of men most men, they want to, pursue, they want to lead. And so, and if a woman is, say, like maybe chasing him, rather literally or emotionally, it can kind of turn a man off. Just different dynamics that kind of go at play, or the reason why, we see a lot in, like, say there's like a conflict going on. A lot of times, women, we want to talk about it right now, be really emotional, let's connect. But men often need time to kind of go away and retreat, and they often sometimes think more in like solution based, and that's why sometimes there's that
Mhm.
conflict. There's a great book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It kind of
Oh,
hits.
yes, classic.
Yeah, and it's such a game changer because for me personally, I didn't grow up with any brothers. I'm not close to like any uncles, and my dad, we never really talked a lot about dating or relationships. So I had no understanding of men when it came to the dating realm, right? And so it was really kind of hard for me to interpret maybe why a man was acting a certain way, or it was really hard for me to also be in connection with my feminine energy in some aspects, just because I think a lot of times as women, especially I see this in the Black community. Well, there's three things needed for a woman to be able to relax and surrender in her feminine nature, and that is safety, security, and the third, I think, is feeling special. And so basically, it's like, in order for a woman to feel comfortable enough to relax in her femininity of, being taken care of, being provided for, receiving, feeling worthy of love, what's often needed to be there is the masculine presence, that masculine energy. And that first comes about when it comes in the father-daughter relationship, right? And so for a lot of women, sometimes if the father's not there, we get kind of hardened in our heart, and we sometimes operate in a lot of masculine energy, right? Where we feel we need to be really self-protective, very defensive, or we don't trust men, or it's hard to receive from men because we feel like we have to take care of ourselves, do it on our own, and men don't feel safe anymore, right? Because there's like that lack of provision, protection from a man that should have been there in the first place. So a lot of women can swing to that end, or maybe your dad was very emotionally unavailable or unhealthy, and so now you're attracted to a lot of men that embody those traits. And so getting back in touch with your feminine, learning how to open your heart to love, learning how to receive, which often comes from feeling worthy of love, right? Like I have a lot of friends that, like, if a guy opens the door for them, it's like, I didn't need to do that. I can do it all by myself. It's like, yeah, you can, but you don't have to. And that's the beauty of it, you know? And everyone's gonna have their own what they want. But what I find for most women I work with is they want a man to lead, to pursue, to make them feel special. They want to feel soft, but sometimes they're scared to feel that, or they're scared that they may be taken advantage of, which is why you do need to have discernment and wisdom. Because there's some men that are operating in a really unhealthy masculine, right? And so it's learning, hey, what does healthy versus unhealthy masculine look like? And then what does healthy versus unhealthy feminine look like? So that's kind of a little overview.
No, I totally get what you're saying. And men are
Yeah.
from Mars and women are from Venus. That was I remember way back when that book came out, and that just caused a lot of waves, and it was really a groundbreaking, eye-opening book.
Mhm.
But, in terms of the masculine energy, I definitely agree with just sort of the safety in terms of how we were raised. And I find that, especially with a lot of the women that I've worked with and that I encounter, is that when you don't have that male presence, or you don't have that. And I get it that this is a totally, again, heteronormative conversation, but I'm
Mhm.
talking about old school, nuclear family,
Mhm.
or the expectations around that. You know,
Mhm.
women were raised to be very independent and not depend on anyone. And so that becomes a survival skill that they then start to translate over into everyday life. And as an adult woman, I
Yeah.
think of it as like a toxic independence, because it then becomes this thing where it's like, I don't need anybody, I've got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And that really sort of shuts the right type of men out, because
Yeah.
the only type of men who are attracted to that are toxic or dusties. Like, oh,
Yeah.
my person doesn't need anybody. Great.
Yeah.
She can take care of everything. Great.
Yep.
That's the type of woman I need to be with, because I
Yep.
can latch on to a
Mhm.
woman that can do that. And so I think, when women when they're talking about masculine energy, or women and sort of embodying that, is because,
Mhm.
yes, that has been conditioned. That's a survival skill, but we have to know when to adjust and when to allow people to step up, as you said, and receive.
Yeah.
But also know that people that are generally, as a rule of thumb, attracted to that type of energy are usually the ones that want to be taken care of.
Yes. And normally it's men who want to do the 50-50 thing or they're very passive and all these things, or they're more
What do
masculine.
you bring to the table?
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, it's just yeah, and a lot of times you'll often and those type of men, and I don't want to bring shame around this. I'm just, sharing
Yeah.
it. Those type of men are often raised by single mothers, right? And so what happens that there's a really due to fatherlessness, there's a total breakdown in the family unit, and a lot of societal ills can be rooted back to fatherlessness. But when the father's not in the home, say you have a single mother and she's raising a son and a daughter, what she often does with the son is sometimes so the way men and women grow is different, right? Women for men, a lot of times it's like, okay, they try, they may fail, they get up again. It's a lot of like grit, like kind of working hard, all of that type of stuff. For women, if you try to make a woman grow by like, just you toughen up, just da 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 da, like we're not going to grow that way. We need connection, we need to feel safe, we need to be nurtured, all that kind of stuff, right? And it's not saying that men don't need any of that, but it's just the level to which they need it. It's just a lot different from women, right? And so a lot of times, maybe you have a single mom raising a son and a daughter, and what the mom will do is that, the whole mama's boy thing comes up, right? Where she's very like soft with him, or like, it's okay, or like very just in a way where he doesn't really know how to really uh step up in his manhood or that masculinity, or being strong, things like that, right? And then but on the other hand, she raises the daughter in a very um you need to take care of yourself. Why are you crying? Like toughen up, like toughen up. So it's like this almost like this reversal, right? To where the women are raised, you can only depend on yourself. You need to stop crying. I have to do it by myself. You can do it, and then the men are kind of raised that's kind of coddled and masculated. Because what happens too is, especially when the father is gone, there's like this, the son becomes like the pseudo spouse to the mother, right? Um, because and the mother, and there can kind of be that enmeshment, right? There's not a lot of boundaries, and so the mother's kind of emotionally dependent on the son, because the son is representing that masculine energy in her life, and so she gets totally enmeshed with him. And that's why a lot of men, they grow up and they or their mom takes care of them a lot, and so now they want a woman to mother them and take care of them, which puts a woman in her masculine energy, because she's like leading, taking charge, paying for things. And it's like this whole reversal, right? And so the men are frustrated, women are frustrated, because there's like this total just reversal. And a lot of it, like I said, goes back to that fatherlessness. So yeah, it's really something to look out for. I'd love that there's more conversation about it, because I think for a while there was certain messaging that we thought, oh, being strong, independent, all this stuff was helping us, but it really wasn't. And it's not to say that being feminine doesn't mean you're not strong and independent. It just means that you don't feel the need to like carry it as like this shield, right? And you allow
Mhm.
someone to take care of you. It's like, yeah, I
Mm.
can do it by myself. But why would I want to? Like, you know what I mean? And it doesn't. And I promise, and men, they love to feel like they can win with you. They love to feel like they can succeed with you. A man is not going to do anything he feels like he can't succeed in, including marriage in a relationship, which is why a lot of men sometimes put that off, because maybe they feel like they don't have enough money yet, they don't have the right job, all that kind of stuff. So good, healthy men, they want to take care of you. They love that, right? Unless they, like I said, grew up maybe like single mom to where they only want to be taken care of. But most men, they take pride in that, right? Of working hard, being able to take care of a family, makes them feel good, makes them feel accomplished. And as a woman, it's like, yeah, I would love that. So, but there's just a lot of sometimes woundings and generalizations behind that, and women who have maybe been hurt by men, so now their view of men is skewed, and things like that. So yeah.
Mm. So for a woman, if there's a woman that's listening and she's not quite sure if she's operating with masculine energy,
Hmm.
can you tell us a little bit about some of some of maybe the hallmark traits that a woman who's operating in masculine energy, what sort of things she would be demonstrating, and as well as, I don't know if you care to share a man who might be operating in feminine energy or something like
Yeah.
that. Mhm.
Great. Yeah. So some hallmark signs of women may be operating in masculine energy. I think number one, hyper independency, being self sufficient. That's usually a huge thing, right? So things like mentality, like I can do it all by myself. I don't need anyone. I'm good on my own. And sometimes the whole like kind of boss babe mentality can slip into that. And I'm not saying you can't.
Mm.
I'm not saying you can't be a boss babe and can't be feminine, but there's a way. There's a great person I follow on Instagram. She talks a lot about masculine versus feminine polarity, even in the way you do business, right? Because another nature of the feminine is like attracting versus like, chasing. So just, yeah, just, so the first one I would say is just hyper independent self sufficiency. You take care of yourself all by yourself, and you kind of take pride in that. Like you don't want any help, right? And I get it. There's some women who maybe they don't have anyone they can depend on, and maybe they like don't believe in God, so they don't have this like, oh, I can depend on God. But yeah, just this like taking pride in doing it all by yourself is a big one. Having a hard time receiving from a man. something as simple as a compliment, right? Or him holding the door open for you. It just feels very uncomfortable and you don't like it. Another thing I think is the whole shooting your shot thing. I know there's controversy on that, but I personally am like, the feminine nature is the nature that is the receiving, and the masculine is the giver, right? And so, especially in the beginning. So, for me personally, like, I think you show interest, right? Maybe making eye contact for a little bit of time, whatever. But like going out of a total like sliding right in the DMs, like, hey, can I take you out? It's just like you're putting that man in the feminine nature of receiving, and you're getting in the masculine of giving. And what happens is that the way you start a relationship will often impact the way it continues, right? So if you started off having
Mm,
to chase him and initiate, it's probably going to continue, right? He's going to keep expecting that. So I think that's another thing is that if you find that you're always initiating with a guy or always just like kind of either chasing him physically or mentally chasing him, so obsessing about him all the time, thinking about him 24/7, you're giving him all of this energy. I think another sign is being very defensive, very combative, aggressive, things like that. And
mm,
also not being in tune with your emotions. A big part of the feminine, like I said, is being in your body, being in your heart space, and right. And so if you're very just emotionally closed off, that
mhm,
could be a sign that you're kind of in more of that masculine energy. Another sign is if you, when it comes to relationships and stuff, or just life, you're always just thinking very logical, but you don't take time to kind of get into that heart space, like I said. Impatience can be another one because a big part of the feminine nature is being patient, being going with the flow. But if you're very impatient, you want to make things happen. It's like you're in that. And another thing too is that in society in general kind of pushes us. We're all the society is like especially the Western society. It's a very masculine energy driven society, right? Hustle culture, working 24/7, do, right? And so it's a lot of times it's counterintuitive for women to step back and slow down and be more in tune. So it's like pushing women to be in that, especially like if you're a woman maybe working in tech or masculine dominated work environment, sometimes that forces you to kind of be more in that masculine energy, which is okay at times. We all have to use our logical, we all tap into our masculine energy at some points, but it's knowing how to like step back into your femininity and surrender to that, especially when it comes to dating and relationships. And then on the other end, signs that a guy may be more in his feminine energy or more kind of more emasculated. I think a big one is passivity,
mm,
very, very passive. That can be dating or relationships, right? So he doesn't really speak up much. He never has an opinion. He lets the woman just do whatever. Another sign is that he wants to be taken care of or wants to be mothered. So this, I see this a lot. Women dating men,
mm.
no car, no job, no ambition, smoking weed all day or something, and the woman is like, "Hey, do you want to apply for this job?" Like trying to take care of him. It's like you're in a mother son dynamic at that point. Um, I think another sign is men who uh how do I word this? Men who kind of talk down about men a lot. I've seen that to be
Mm.
a sign. So men who are kind of very like always just getting out on men, like tearing them down. It's like a lot of times he's kind of out of tune with his own masculinity. And so he's like hate like is I don't know, because I think too, like a big thing men need is respect and honor. Men interpret that
Mm.
as we even see that in the Bible. There's a book called Love and Respect, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's a coincidence that there is such a tear down of men in our society right now, right? Like there's even a brand I know, a clothing brand, it's called like Boys Lie. Like there's just so much tearing down men, right? And I get it. There are some unhealthy, toxic things, right? There's also unhealthy and toxic women, but we wouldn't ever push like all these dicks against women. So I think that's kind of strategic. But yeah, kind of going back to that, I think men who are very like men are this, men are that. It's normally because he has his own wounding around that, maybe some father wounding, and he's kind of gotten emasculated, especially like
Yeah.
he's grew up around only women, and he's heard his mom or the aunts in his life be like, men are this, men are that. Um, I think another sign would be a man who just has a hard time leading, pursuing, initiating, and making decisions. That's a huge part of the masculine nature. And so a lot of emasculated men, they have an inability to do that, right? And so they can't make a decision, they can't lead, they can't initiate. Um, then they're just very passive. So I think those are some of the major things. And then also last one I would say is just they struggle to provide. That can be financially or emotionally, but they just struggle to get their grounding. So maybe they're like, 30 and still living at home. And I know sometimes happens. So I'm not getting to those circumstances, but just generally they have a hard time launching into the world.
And
And
that's more of a consistent pattern. It's not just like a
exactly,
one-off, like isolated incident. Like it's
exactly.
like a consistent over time. There's just,
Yep.
you know.
Yep.
Hmm.
And the crazy thing is that there's this thing called the law of polarity, and so it's kinda like just like magnets, opposites attract. So a lot of women who are operating in that masculine, you're gonna end up a lot of men in that feminine because it's that opposite attract thing, right? And then vice versa. If you're operating more in that feminine, you will attract a more masculine man and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing to remember is that men who, people that are dependent and needy are going to be attracted to that. I've got it, because
Yeah.
if you got it, then that, like, if you've got everything and you don't need any help, you're great to take care of someone like me, right? And
Yeah.
that's how you might attract like a lot of narcissist or unhealthy
Mhm.
personalities.
Yep.
So many things, right? So
Yeah.
many things.
Yeah.
And these are great points to bring up, because I think a lot of people use that and they don't really understand like the long-term impact of that energy. And
Mhm.
again, I get it. I'm very old school and that I'm very old school and very old fashioned, that I like for men to be men and women to be
Yeah.
women in that
Yeah.
way. And that's just how I operate. And I get that a lot of new age folks don't
Mhm.
really view things that way, but I do feel like, for the majority, human behavior is human behavior over time.
Yeah.
And there
Mhm.
are some things that are just going to stay consistent.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think as far as like, I think of this because as a coach, there's a lot of other coaches, some that maybe Christian, some more just
Sure.
spirituality. You see a lot of talk of that, the masculine, feminine. I think the where it gets people really don't like it is when you kind of get or kind of buck against it is when you get into more modern kind of liberal spaces. I see people kind of,
Yes.
but I mean, I'm personally, like I said, I'm a Christian, so that's gonna, shape my worldview. But
Yes.
and even like you said, like it's human behavior science. Like we go back to prehistoric times, back in the
Yes.
evolutionary times when we see men, they're out hunting and the women home with the children, it's like it's evolutionary in our bones to be attracted to the men who are very masculine or very kind
Yes.
of the alpha because it was a safety thing, right? And it just
Yes.
or like it's not shallow for a woman to want a man to be able to provide financially because it's like when you have babies, you know what I mean? It's like what if you're in bed, in bed rest, and like it's like in our bones to have this nature of like, okay, a man who can protect you, who can provide for you, a man who can initiate, because a man who can make decisions, a man who can lead, that is a man that can help provide safety and security to you. And as women, I mean, it's not always the same as back then, but we still are more vulnerable in society. And then vice versa for men, like a lot of men, like if a man, some men, want to stay home, not work, whatever. But most men, like if they're not working, they're not making money, they're not providing, they're not going after their goals, they will feel very less than, or they will feel very defeated. And so it's like in their nature too, to want to provide, to want to work hard. So I think, yeah, God created us and he didn't make a mistake. And I think it makes sense in a lot of people that I see where it gets flipped, there usually is some type of wounding around it that has caused that reversal, and they usually don't feel that satisfied internally. So, yeah.
Mm. How does one go about sort of correcting that if they're
Mm,
operating in the wrong energy?
yeah. I think one of the major things, well, first speaking for women, I think getting really curious, right? And so first identifying,
Uh,
okay, what areas of my life, yeah, what areas of my life am I operating more of that masculine energy? And actually, I've created an assessment on my website that can help women identify that. It's kind of like a quiz, you do a little score. But yeah, I think first identifying, okay, where am I operating more of masculine energy? And it can be very subtle ways, right? And so, for example, a subtle way is that being very like controlling, right? Or overthinking about a guy a lot. So it doesn't always look like you're like, oh, I don't need anyone. Maybe it's subtle ways like you're just a lot of control issues, or you always are, obsessing over them, things like that. Always in your headspace. So I think just getting very curious, and then I'm always big on the inner work is feeling, okay, why do I, because a lot of times when women are operating in masculine energy, it's a protective mechanism, right? It's because they don't feel safe, they don't feel secure, they don't feel special, all of that. And so I would have to ask myself, okay, why am I almost like wearing this masculine shield of this XYZ behavior? Right. So okay, maybe for women it's like, oh, it's because I don't trust men. Why don't I trust men? Because my dad did this. And kind of exploring that, healing that, and then be able to like kind of correct those generalizations you have in your mind about men, right? Because it's another thing, like your subconscious beliefs, generalizations, it will impact what you attract, right? So if you think all men suck, you're going to attract sucky men because you think that there's nothing else out there. So you settle for that. And then two, you're going to push away the good men because no good man wants to be with a woman who's bitter against him, right? Or things
Yeah.
all messed up. The same way that I, as a woman, would not want to be with a man who's like, women suck. Like, okay, well, why would I be with you, right? I'm going to be with a more healthy man that will appreciate me, right? And so
Mhm.
healing the deeper wound of that, knowing that not all men are that way or XYZ, or knowing that, hey, I don't have to control everything, that I'm safe, that I'm okay. And then me, like, as well, being a Christian, I always recommend, or well, I don't say recommend, but I think it's so key is being able to receive God's love as your father.
Yes.
Because that surrender to Christ, that is a true thing that will help you surrender to your femininity. Because God, he's presented as father, the masculine. So resting in him, letting him be your father, it will relax in your femininity in such a strong way of just feeling safe, protected, and being able to surrender, to know that, like, okay, I don't have to do it all by myself because God will help me. Or I don't have to, be so defensive all the time because God will protect me. And I'm not saying you don't have wisdom. I'm not saying you don't have boundaries, right? But I'm just saying that you don't live with like this cage around your heart. It's more so like a door, like, okay, you open when you see fit, you don't, versus like a cage or nothing and no one can get in. And so that's a huge part, especially if you don't have an earthly father that you can kind of do that with. I think letting God be your father is a huge thing to help you relax in your femininity, because the two energies need each other, right? In order for you to be in your
Mhm.
femininity, you need the masculine presence to relax in that. That's why when you have maybe a household of only women, there's usually women who are operating on that masculine energy because they have to make up for the deficit of the masculine energy being gone.
Mm.
So that's why, you can see, sometimes women, they act different when men are around. I'm not saying in a way of like, the flirty thing, but just when men get around it, you just see kind of women light up or relax a little bit more because they don't have to be doing all this X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
So that's what I would say for that. And then there's also practical things you can do, like getting in touch with your body. So like maybe
Mm.
dancing or being in nature or deep breathing, meditating, like spending time to slow down, be like, how do I feel? Get back in your heart space. And then there's also different practical ways that you can um, practice communication with men. So dropping more in your feminine when it comes to communication. So using more like I feel statements or telling a man how you make them feel. That will really encourage him to step up and continue that behavior. Because
Yes.
like I said, men love to know that they can succeed with you. It makes them feel so good, and they'll want to keep doing that. When they know they can please you, make you feel good, it makes them want to keep doing that, and it makes them feel like they are able to accomplish that. And so that's why when you nag a man, you push him away, right? And I'm talking about healthy men. I'm not talking about a bad guy who's not. I'm talking
Yeah.
about a man affirming, "Hey, you made me feel so good. You made me feel so safe on this date." It's gonna make him want to do more. And then going to, well, I can't really speak that much on like men getting back in touch with their masculine because I'm not a man, but I do follow some like men online, and that's another thing
Sure.
too. I would say to follow different mentors that speak on this, and there's a lot of
Yes.
pages. There's one I really recommend. It's called Masculine Revival, and he does a lot of work around helping men heal, and then also embody more of that masculine energy because a lot of men need healing as well. But I think for men getting around male mentors, coaches, especially if they don't have like a father in their life, getting around healthy masculine figures, learning what it means to lead. Also, like I said, I'm a Christian, so the Bible I think has a lot to say on healthy manhood, biblical manhood, and then godly womanhood as well. So that's always a great resource.
I love that. And I totally agree with a lot of what you were saying there. I do think part of that is asking questions. But also, I think another part of it is taking stock or taking inventory of the relationships that you have around you too, because
Yeah.
a lot of times when you're in the energy, you have people around you that are sort of feeding off of that are maybe takers or that do require you to just sort of give because that's a
Yeah.
dynamic, as you were saying before, that's been set up right from the beginning. So it may even just be um, reevaluating and even sort of stepping away and letting some of those relationships go so that new energy can come in.
Most definitely. Yeah. Because kind of going back to the childhood stuff, for example, a lot of women, maybe you grew up, you had to be, maybe like say you're the oldest sibling, or maybe you had a narcissistic parent or something like that, to where you just have to overgive, earn love, be a
Yes.
people pleaser, fix.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
heavy in that masculine energy of just giving. You didn't have the safety, security, all that to relax or in your,
Yes.
but now you're repeating that same dynamic where maybe you had to, like, for example, maybe you have a mother wound, you had to mother your mother because she was very self-absorbed, narcissistic, or maybe more of that vulnerable narcissist, whatever. So now you're always attracting men that you have to mother because you only know how to relate to others by being helpful. And so I think, yeah, it all it all ties together. And
It
same for men.
does.
I've seen this. I heard someone on a podcast. He's talking about, it was a Christian man talking about, he's married now. Growing up, he had to take care of his mother a lot. Or no, yeah, he had to take care of his mother a lot. Well, no, that's a different thing. But in terms of the masculine energy, he had a situation where I think there was like a bad breakup he went through or something, where basically he kind of learned that he became married now, and it was hard for him to lead, initiate, because he didn't want to feel like a taker from his wife. Like he didn't want to feel like he was always just taking. So he had a hard time like stepping up, leading, and things like that. So there's just a lot of childhood stuff that can go behind that, or even men who, don't grow up with their father or things like that. They don't know how to step in that man. They don't know how to lead, or maybe they grew up in poverty, or there's a lot of limiting beliefs around money, so they have a hard time providing, and just there's always just a lot of childhood stuff that kind of goes behind all this.
Mm. Can we talk about limerence and what that is? And
Yes.
why is that a thing?
So limerence, essentially, it's when we get into this very obsessive. We get very obsessive about someone, kind of in that fantasy mode. They kind of just take over your thoughts, sometimes your dreams, and we're just so fixated on them and the idea of being with them. And it can be like in a sexual way or just romantic way. And so the biggest thing to note with limerence is that it can feel like love, but it's not. Right. And I have like
Mm.
a TikTok I made on the difference. Like, for example, actually, I have the chart if that's okay, because
Absolutely.
I think it's really helpful. I'm a visual person, but yeah. So some signs that you may be in limerence, in versus, because sometimes, okay, what is limerence versus love? So
Mm.
limerence is more like a brief moment of intense connection, whereas secure love would be a solid connection inspired by security. Um,
Mm.
Limerence would be more like, a lot of mind games and things like that. Secure love, there's clear communication. In limerence, it's like you're looking for this perfect person, you're idolizing people, putting them on a pedestal. Versus secure love, you understand that no perfect person exists, but you also have like a healthy like way to determine who's a healthy, unhealthy person, things like that. Limerence is all about obtaining affection, so what you're going to get. Versus real love is about, giving affection. And then lastly, limerence, it's like a fast obsession followed by a fast ending, whereas secure love develops over time and it's a slow and steady burn. And so with limerence, what I've seen is a lot of limerence is just playing out our core wounds, right? And it's like we're trying to correct past trauma, heal unresolved trauma, sometimes through this new situation, this new person. And we're more so in love with the idea of them versus who they actually are because of what they represent to us in our mind, right? And so, for example, maybe you grew up with emotionally unavailable dad and you always get obsessive over guys who are emotionally unavailable. You're trying to get them to want you. You have fantasies about them finally being with them, all this stuff. It's because part of you feel like, okay, if I can get this guy to become available for me, then it's going to correct that past wounding of not feeling worthy enough for my dad's availability. And so a lot of limerence behind it is a lot of just like trauma playing out.
And it's important in the way I think it weaves into what we were talking about earlier, because as you were saying, people who are operating in the wrong energies
Hmm.
oftentimes experience limerence.
Hmm.
And I feel like limerence, a large part of limerence is banking on or sort of hoping for potential to
Yeah.
blossom into something else.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when, I saw this the other day, when we're banking on potential, that person to develop into this potential love,
Hmm.
really what we're banking on is ourselves because we are
Yeah.
that potential.
Yeah. I actually saw a TikTok that was talking about that same thing. Like when
Yeah.
you
And I'm
fantasize, you really
like,
just do that for yourself. Yeah.
you're looking for someone to give you back the same energy that you're putting into. You're replaying the narrative and you have this energy and you're just hoping that someone else is going to give that back to you because you're emptying your emotional piggy bank,
Yeah.
right? And you want someone to pour into you the way that you're pouring into this.
Yep. Yep. And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't fully know this, but I feel like it can tie to codependency as well,
Absolutely.
because it's like with codependency, it's just you give so much of yourself and you get resentful when you don't get it in return. But what you're giving was probably beyond what you needed to in the first place. And so it's like this. you kind of end up being resentful towards them. And yeah, limerence is like almost, I know it's almost like an addiction to this person, right? And I know like limerence and love
Yes.
addiction tie together a lot, but it's like you're obsessed with them. They're the object of your affection. But it's like I said, it's not really about love. It's more like using them or what they represent to kind of numb your own pain, the same way that people do with other types of drugs. It's like a numbing thing. Um, but yeah, and it normally leaves you feeling worse than you started.
It does. And I think people who I don't want to say fall victim to this, but fall victim to this for the lack of a better word. I think it becomes a pattern a lot of times that people sort of internalize and that they're not aware of, and that they do it across the board with a lot of relationships. It becomes more apparent
Mhm.
in their romantic or intimate partnerships, that I feel like a lot of people do this even with their parents, or families of origin relationships, their friendships. They just kind of keep hoping and wishing and sort of obsessing,
Mhm.
and even though they may not, I think the difference is it's not always top of mind,
Mhm.
but they have to do a lot of emotional work around,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I think oftentimes when people are getting that limerence fantasy mode, all of that,
Yes.
a lot of it it's like in childhood, right? They only had fantasy to rely on as far as a
Mhm.
connection with the parent, right? And so it's like they're almost used to there's like there can be a thrill with trying to obtain versus actually having something, right? So it's like this chase. It can feel more thrilling to like trying to get it. And so kind of limerence kind of keeps you in that state of just this, it's like this longing that's never filled, right?
Yeah. Or
Um,
maybe it's a coping skill too that has turned into a way of life. Because
yeah,
as you said, like a core wound, a
mm,
lot of people when they don't have someone, even if they're physically present, but they're not emotionally present,
yeah,
that can also be very similar to just the absenteeism. You have to fill in the blanks. In kids and, people that are sort of growing up in with those unfulfilled needs, we try to fill in the blanks, and the only way we have to do that is imagine.
yeah, yeah. That's so good. It's yeah, because you said when as a child, and also too as a child, I think it's a lot easier to because as children, very egocentric. It's a lot easier to it's hard to cope with like, oh, a parent's not available for me because we don't really have that language. All we know is that there's not this need being filled. So then we create this fantasy in our mind, or sometimes we self blame, like, oh, it's because I'm not good enough. Is why my mom, can love on me, or my dad is not here. And so, yeah, I think you're so right. We don't have language of what this means. We don't, so I'm in a process with, so all we can do is kind of fill in the blanks in our mind or make up this fantasy or make up this story or kind of live in la la land as a coping mechanism.
Absolutely, because one thing that is pretty common across the board, typically in my experience, children, um, that have been abused or have unfulfilled needs, or have been abandoned by
Hmm.
parents, very seldom do they ever blame the parents, right? They keep this sort of undying, unwavering love for them, and they'll internalize the blame. And so,
Hmm.
in order to do that, we have to do so much mental work to
Hmm.
keep that person alive, keep that person in good standing and up on a pedestal, or almost in like this, like, mind state, like they're not a bad person, they didn't do bad things, because sort of allowing yourself to feel that would be too horrible of a thing.
Yes.
And
Yep.
it's kind of like the same thing here, like this person, we've got to make it work, even though, all I have to do is sort of bend and contort myself in all these ways and make myself more lovable, and
Hmm.
just sort of chase this thing, and
Hmm.
eventually this story will play out right.
Yeah. 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 It's the mind. We have an incredible way to sometimes have hope, but it's like a false hope, right? Like a false thing. We're hoping, yeah, we hope that things will just correct themselves. And it kind of ties to, the breadcrumbing thing. It's the same thing going on, right? Like with a lot of our
Mm.
maybe they gave you some affection, but then that's where a lot of the anxious attachment comes in because like okay, you have it a little bit, then you don't. It's like a pullback, and it's that inconsistency that keeps you so addicted to them. Um,
Yeah.
Now in your relationships, it's like this guy's breadcrumbing you, like, okay, he texts you to hang out, then you don't hear from him for a couple of weeks, or he says he likes you, then he's dating someone, all this mixed signals, this breadcrumbing, but we're holding on to this fantasy, hoping that'll correct itself, hoping we can be good enough, hoping we can earn their love. And it's a
Yeah.
dynamic of hoping that our parent will, love us, or maybe we felt like we were on thin ice with their parents. So we have to like kind of, like you said, contort and kind of like, and we're doing that same thing now.
And breadcrumbing is very interesting because that doesn't just happen when we're dating. I know a lot of people talk about it again in the context of dating, but it
Hmm.
happens even when you're married, if you're in these long-term relationships,
Hmm.
if even with your parents,
Yeah.
breadcrumbing happens across the board. And I think if someone's sort of talking out of both sides of their mouth, which means that a person is saying one thing but doing another, that's a
Hmm.
sure sign that this person is a breadcrumber, in my opinion.
For sure. Yeah. If your action, like, yeah, actions and words, if they're not lining
Don't
up.
match. Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
match. And that happens quite a bit. But again, it's so amazing what people will do when they're being breadcrumbed. Again, they'll fill in the blank. They'll sort of they'll do what I like to call they'll assign emotions. Right?
Hmm.
Oh, he or she, they must be feeling this way, and that's why they did that. Well, where did that come from?
Yeah.
How do you know this person's actually feeling this way or thinking these things? Well, and they can't really answer that. That's just sort of how they fill in the blanks and come up with this sort of story.
Yep.
We
Yep.
create stories in our mind of how things
Yeah.
should work.
Yeah. That's so good. And it's like, and the thing I had to tell myself too, because in my past, I struggled a lot with the whole unavailable guy, my
Mm,
dad. And also ways that, because women too, that's a whole other conversation, but women are often a lot of times emotionally unavailable as well. It just shows up in more subtle, covert ways.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Whereas men, it's more the invert. Oh, he's aloof. He only wants sex. Doesn't want to commit. Non emotional. Whatever. But women, we can also be very emotionally unavailable in the same token.
Absolutely.
But one thing I have to say is okay. Even if this guy really does like me, but he's only sending me mixed signals because he's scared to open his heart to love, or he whatever. Even if that is true, which may not be, because like I said, I made up the story. Either way, he's not in a healthy, healed, or whatever state to confront that and be with me anyway or pursue me anyway. So even if my
Hmm.
story is true, he's still not the guy for you because he still is unable to or unwilling to confront these fears, pursue you, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, yeah, number one, being like, okay, the story, I'm making up the story, it may not even be true. And even if it is true, it doesn't change anything, right? It just means that, okay, but he's still not in a place emotionally, whatever, to be with you. So that has to be the end of
He's
it.
not doing the work. He's not doing the work.
Exactly. And you can't do the work for him. You really can't.
Amen to that, and I think that's what a lot of people have to stop and think about. You cannot lead a horse to water and force it to drink, meaning that you
Yep.
can't do the work, you can't handhold someone. And
Mhm.
even let's just say, like you said, if you did, what does that mean? That means you have to do it throughout the entire
Yep.
relationship. You're going to be sort of hand holding,
Yep.
breastfeeding this person throughout the
Yeah.
entire relationship.
Mhm.
It's so
Yep.
amazing how many people are willing to do that.
Mhm. And I think a lot of it too is it's your mindset around that. I think there's a lot of lack mindset, right? Where we feel like we don't feel like
Mhm.
we don't feel like there's any other fish in the sea. This is the only fish I have. This is the only thing I'm worthy of. This love may not come around again. This is all I have, so I got to make it work. And so, and a lot of that comes back to identity, confidence, things like that, but a lot of times like, well, I don't think another guy will come along, so I need to make it work, right? So I think when women can shift, especially women who lean more in that anxious attachment zone, is like shift and be like, hey, there's plenty of fish in the sea. I don't have to and I also don't have to work for love. Love should not feel like work. It shouldn't feel like you're having to earn it. But a lot of times it feels like that because of our childhood. So, that we have to correct that. But yeah, it's like it shouldn't be like this, right? You shouldn't have to convince a guy to want to be with you. And same with doing the inner
Yeah.
work, because one thing about a man's will is strong. And so it's like, and that puts you so in your masculine energy to be trying to fix him, trying to make him do stuff like, no, 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 no.
Not only is his will strong, but I think there's this notion And again, I know this isn't politically correct, and I'll
Mhm.
apologize now if I
I'm not
offend
politically
anyone,
correct.
but there's this notion that men are dumb. Like, "Oh, he doesn't get
Mhm.
it. Oh, he doesn't understand." There's sort of like this simplification that they don't understand or they don't have the tools or they don't have the awareness or the
Mhm.
wherewithal, and very seldom is that true. Now, if a person has a cognitive impairment or, something like that, that might be a bit of a different thing, but if you have
Yeah,
a healthy, normal, functioning person, it's not that they don't get it, it's because they don't want to 9 times out of 10.
yeah, yeah. And I do think that there are men who are emotionally, immature or emotionally their EQ is low.
Sure, sure.
And a lot of it because a lot like, I'm reading a book right now called Adult Children of Emotionally Mature Parents, How
Oh,
to Heal
yeah.
Projecting, Distancing. So, I do think there are men and women who don't have some of the emotional tools. However, it's 2022. You can Google really quickly, "How to overcome my fear of commitment." You know what I mean? So, like and yeah, if a man wants you, I promise you, he will do what he needs to do
Yeah,
to be with you. He will do the work on himself. But then also, you don't wanna be the foundation for why he's changing or healing because
absolutely.
then it's like you become an idol to them. Or two, okay, what happens when you get in an argument or he's mad at you? Then what does he's like, no, what, never mind, I'm not gonna do all these tools or whatever because now he's upset with you. Same for like
Right.
see a lot of the Christian community, like the whole missionary dating, trying to get a guy to,
Absolutely.
it's like, no. But yeah, I think you're right. Like men are not dumb, right? And if they wanted to, they would.
They
And
would.
yeah, and it can
They
also be our
would.
pride and ego that feels like it's our job to change them. Like, and we are not God, right? And we cannot be their therapist. We cannot be their like. That's not our role to be. It's not build a man, all that, like you said. So, yeah, but I think that's a good thing that if he wanted to, he would, and yeah, he's very capable. He can, yeah,
They can do it, right? And even if
yes,
there is some sort of emotional deficiency,
hmm
again, they're aware of this. Now, whether or not they wanna change that,
that
that's
part.
the key, you know what I mean? So that's the key, like, they wanna be willing to put in the effort,
Yeah.
and that at the end of the day, this is where the sort of relationship assessment comes in because you have to really look at, do the 2 of you have the same core values? And I think that's what a lot of people also forget, like, when they have these relationships, even with, again, family of origin or whomever, like, are your core values in alignment? So if your one of your core values is, for example, mental health,
Mhm,
are you really sort of aligning yourself with someone who has no interest in
mhm,
mental health, who has no interest in talking about their emotions or working on emotions or working on the emotional health and integrity of the relationship? Because if
mhm.
so, you're out of alignment and you're trying to force a square into a circle as
Yeah,
opposed to, just sort of aligning yourself with people
yeah.
that have the same sort of mindset.
No, that's really good. I think and that's why it kinda going back to the I think a lot of women sometimes can be emotionally unavailable as well because a lot of women, when they're dating, they're just like, "Oh, yeah, I want" a lot of women, they want marriage, they want long-term commitment, they want a committed relationship. But we continue with men who are showing us or some men will blatantly say, "Hey, I don't want commitment. I don't want a relationship." Well, okay, yeah, yeah. And, like, that's, like, a huge core value that's not there, then nothing else is gonna work, right? And so either it's a disillusionment, like, "Oh, we'll give them a change," or you're not really available as well because by staying with someone and always being liking people who are unavailable or don't want commitment, it forces you now you don't have to commit. Now you don't have to be fully available. So you can kind of feel like you're safe and you don't have to be vulnerable. So yeah, I think that's a really good thing. Like getting down to the basics. Like what is creating your list? What do you really want in a guy? What are your top values and standards? And if he doesn't have them, then like core things like marriage, kids, religion, all that stuff, that's major. And you have to face reality and not stay in that fantasy land.
Absolutely. And, going back to your comment about the place of lack,
Hmm
where people feel like, they have to make this relationship work because this is the only person that I can make it work with. A lot of times I wonder and I think that this comes again from the core wound that we were talking about, specifically, with black folks, black families especially, you know, I forget who I was talking to this about the other day. There's sort of this like like if you have one mom and one dad, which we typically do, and
Mhm.
then you have the sort of the peripheral family that sort of comes in and they swoop down on you and they tell you that you got to make it work with them because they're the only parent that you're ever going to have. And then you have these other, like,
Mhm.
sort of reinforcements from outside people telling you you got to make it work, even if your parents are abusive to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where I think a lot of that sort of mindset comes from, is like, you've been conditioned very early on to make it work with people that aren't there, who are abusive or are oppressive, and that thought also sort of, I've seen it show up in, like, your job, where your
Mhm.
job or other spaces can be oppressive. Well, this is the job. I got to make it work. You got to stick it out here. But I think that starts very early on, from that sort of reinforcing behavior, from
Mhm.
unmet needs or abusive dynamics, even with parents, in that you're taught or you're sort of groomed into thinking like, hey, make it work with them. It's not that bad. You got to do this or you got to do that so that they won't do that. And I think that sort of those reinforcing statements or behaviors or people start to ingrain that in your mind. And so that
Yeah.
you have to make it work regardless of whatever situation or person that you're with.
Yep. It's like the whole struggle love thing, right? Or being a ride or die. Like, no.
Yeah,
And I think, yeah, a lot of, entertainment reinforces that too, right? We see women in the media or movies staying with men who continue to cheat on them, refuse to marry them, put them through hell. And it's like almost like you're rewarded for that. Like, oh, you're strong. It's like, no, and love should not feel that way. And yeah, I have a friend who her mom extremely abusive, but yeah, like, aunts, uncles, all that, she's your mom, you have to love them, you have to whatever, and it's like, no, and I think it gets also tricky with, like, Christians, because the whole honor your parents
oh
or
yes, oh yes, the
but I saw
church
a
is
really great
also a
article.
reinforcer
Yeah.
sometimes.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep, and I saw a really great article about that. It's talking about the difference between, loving them and obeying them, and it's talked about how, like, in the Bible, it's like, okay, after you're 18, you're no longer a child, you kinda transition from, "Oh, you have to obey them," to the, "Okay, honor them," but you can honor your parents and not have a relationship with them or not see them,
Absolutely.
because when a lot of times, like in the Bible, things that God is talking about, He's talking about best case scenarios, right? I don't think God wrote this in mind, like, oh, love your parents, all this stuff, when He wasn't had in mind that your parents would ever abuse you or manipulate you, be narcissistic or things like that. And so people sometimes take that out of context. But yeah, it's a lot of kind of like reinforcing that trauma, and I think you're right. It translates to how we do relationships, or we're just ingrained to just endure bad things because that makes us strong, or that means that you had grit or that you were whatever, but it's like, we're not doing that. So, yeah.
Mm. So many things. I feel like you and I could go on all day.
I know.
But we're at the end. It went by so fast.
I know.
It always does when you're on. Okay,
Yeah,
I love it though. This
me
means that
too.
it's like, it's great. I love having people like you on. And I think I said this last time, that get it, and that we can have
Mm,
these conversations that get,
yeah.
not only get the general context, like limerence and masculine and feminine energy, but also the layers that can go into it, such as spirituality,
Yep,
culture,
yep.
and just all these other little nuances that can definitely have such an impact and keep people, for lack of a better word, stuck.
Yeah, yep. There's so many layers and yeah, because we're body, mind, spirit, soul. So there's so many
Yes.
layers and it all intertwines. And then we have like the social. So yeah, I can go on for days. I love this kind of conversation.
Awesome. Well, don't be surprised if you come back, if I ask you back. So
Okay.
just, but tell people how to find you, what you're working on, what we can support you with, which we're happy to do.
Awesome. Yeah. So you can find me on all my social medias, TikTok, Instagram, all of that at Erika Simone underscore ErikaSimone underscore. And then my website is it's erikasimone.com. And then I have linked it on my bio. So I have my links page and you can find everything there. I just created a free assessment, and it actually will help women determine if they're operating in more of that feminine energy, if their heart's open to love. And so that's linked to my bio. You can do a score, figure out your next steps. And then, yeah, I have a live course going on right now. I'm going to have another one launching soon. I may be doing a free workshop soon. So definitely just follow me on all my socials to get the updated stuff. And then connect with me. My website, get on my email list. You'll get like first dibs, early bird prices, all of
I
that.
love
So,
it.
oh, and then
Love
my
it.
podcast is, I know I said Healed and Free last time, but I went back to my original name, which is Receiving Love. So that's my podcast.
I love it. I can't wait to check
Yeah.
it out. I love it. So thank you so
Yes.
much. And until next
Yeah.
time, thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, want to know what your thoughts were on that show? Please, definitely check us out on social media, and we can continue this conversation on Instagram, YouTube, and all the other platforms that are down below in the show notes for you. And until next time, you guys take care of yourselves and be well. Bye bye. Check out the sneak preview of next week's episode.
So, adult survivors of toxic family members is covers the whole aftermath because I thought I was so cute. I thought that once I cut ties, it was over, and it was actually far from over. My family became sadistically abusive after to try and scare me back. Not because they want to scare me back to repair the relationship, but because they liked and need to have a scapegoat. And toxic families all have to have a scapegoat. So there were many years, the first 4 years, that uh, shook me to my core, some of the abuses that I went through, from sadistic gifts sent here with missing pieces, or they were broken with no gift receipt. So I'd have to break the no contact. They manipulated information around my own father's death. Um,
Mm.
they did some interesting stuff on my daughter's 16th birthday. So you have to prepare for what you see, and I give sort of footprints in the snow in front of you that weren't there for me.